The morning started like any other. Sunlight spilled across the floor, golden and warm, filling the room with a soft glow that made everything seem ordinary. The coffee machine hissed, and the aroma filled the small kitchen, a comforting and familiar scent. Nothing about this day suggested it would be extraordinary. Everything seemed normal. The phone buzzed on the table, a simple notification, but it immediately pulled attention. A news alert. The headline jumped out. A lottery winner had been announced. $40 million. The image attached was blurred, but there was something in the figure, in the shape of the face, in the outline of the eyes and mouth, that made the chest tighten and the breath catch. It was a face that looked exactly like the one reflected in the mirror every morning, the face that had walked through 1,000 ordinary days without incident. But this was impossible. The image became clearer as the video played, the blur fading just enough to make recognition unavoidable. Every feature matched perfectly. The curve of the lips, the angle of the nose, the arch of the eyebrows. Even the way the hair fell over the forehead, slightly tousled, matched perfectly. The thought came instantly. It cannot be. There must be some mistake. But every instinct screamed the same undeniable truth. It was a face that mirrored life with such precision it was almost as if the reflection had stepped out of the mirror and into the world of headlines and cameras. The hands shook slightly, the cup of coffee sitting untouched on the table as disbelief took hold. The normal hum of the morning, the sounds of the coffee machine, the distant traffic, faded into nothing. Nothing existed except the image on the screen and the impossible realization that followed. Questions began flooding in, fast, relentless. How could this happen? How could someone who looked exactly like this face, win the lottery when there had been no ticket purchased, no numbers chosen, no participation at all? It seemed preposterous, impossible. Yet the evidence stared back, unblinking and unyielding. $40 million, a life-altering amount, a fortune that could rewrite the course of existence. And it was in the hands of someone who, in every possible way, appeared identical to the reflection that had been lived for decades. The heart raced. Each thought collided with the next, impossible to sort, impossible to dismiss. Every detail on the blurred screen, now sharpening with every passing second, forced the mind into overdrive. The slight tilt of the head, the barely noticeable scar near the eyebrow, the way the lips pursed when smiling. Every minute detail aligned in a way that seemed both uncanny and terrifying. The realization that followed was suffocating. This was not just coincidence. This was a mirror thrown into reality, a perfect duplicate existing in a world that until now had seemed entirely predictable and safe. There was no warning. There was no reason. One moment, life moved as it always had. The next, it seemed like the universe had conspired to create a perfect doppelganger who had claimed a fortune that should have belonged, by all sense of fairness, to no one else but the reflection staring back every morning. Panic began to rise. Hands clenched against the smooth surface of the kitchen table, knuckles whitening, the mind spinning with every terrifying possibility. Was this a fraud? A mistake? Some cruel trick played by reality or by human design? Nothing made sense. Yet the face on the screen, smiling, victorious, unbothered by the impossibility of the situation, stared back with all the certainty of someone who had won, someone who belonged in the headlines, someone who now carried $40 million as their own. Every instinct screamed to move, to act, to investigate, but what could be done? There were no answers. Only the overwhelming certainty that life had suddenly fractured, splitting into the familiar world of ordinary mornings and the terrifying new world of impossibly perfect likeness and unimaginable fortune. The mind raced through memories, recalling every detail of a life lived cautiously, carefully, unnoticed by the world, ordinary in every sense. Every photograph, every reflection in every mirror, every fleeting glance captured in 1,000 moments across years all screamed the same truth. This should not be happening. It could not be happening. And yet it was. The trembling hands lifted the phone again, zooming in on the image, checking every detail, scrutinizing the numbers, the faint background, the glint in the eyes, the curve of the lips. Every feature aligned, unnervingly, perfectly, as though the world had painted a perfect copy, a twin who had stepped into the lottery, into fortune, into a life that had never been anticipated or earned. Breath caught, heartbeat loud in the chest, reality bending under the weight of impossibility. The mind, in the first moments of shock, tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a lookalike. Maybe it was some promotional image, someone wearing a mask, a Photoshop trick. Every rational explanation was considered, exhausted, discarded, leaving only the unbearable truth. The reflection had come to life and taken the prize that should, by every ordinary measure, have been impossible. Eyes fixed on the screen, the story unfolded. Details emerged. A small video clip of the winning moment, the ticket in hand, the ecstatic laughter, the confetti falling, all perfectly aligned with the gestures, the posture, the expression that had always existed in the ordinary mornings before this impossible revelation. Each frame was a confirmation, a further descent into disbelief. The hands lifted, trembling, to cover the mouth, trying to contain the growing storm of fear, confusion, and disbelief. The ordinary world had been replaced with something else entirely, something unfamiliar, something terrifying in its perfect alignment with a life that should not have been replicated. And then the numbers on the ticket were noticed, faintly visible, almost subliminally. Numbers chosen at random by the world, by chance, by fate. Numbers that now had meaning beyond comprehension. Numbers that were part of a puzzle that had no explanation, no rational solution. $40 million. A reflection that could have been, that should have been, and now existed as a reality that made the familiar world seem absurdly distant and meaningless. The realization sank deeper, clawing at every rational thought, twisting logic into something fragile and untenable. Each heartbeat echoed with the impossible truth. The face on the screen smiled, triumphant, unaware of the turmoil caused in a parallel life that should have existed, that mirrored perfectly, but had not. The phone shook slightly in the trembling hands. The world around faded to a muted background. The coffee cooled, untouched, as attention remained fixed on the image. On the perfect reflection that had crossed into reality, claiming what should never have been claimed, turning an ordinary day into a nightmare and a mystery in equal measure. Thoughts collided with one another, impossible questions forming with increasing urgency. Why this face? Why now? How could a life that had always existed peacefully, predictably, ordinarily, be mirrored in a stranger, a duplicate, a winner of impossible fortune? Each second stretched endlessly, the impossibility of the situation creating a tension that made the air feel thick, heavy, and almost unbreathable. And yet, clarity came in fragments. The realization that nothing in ordinary logic could explain the moment. The reflection, the twin, the duplicate, the perfect look-alike, had stepped into a world that should have been safe, untouched, predictable, and had taken everything that should not have been taken. Every ordinary morning, every quiet habit, every simple pleasure now felt fragile, irrelevant, overshadowed by the undeniable truth that the world had cracked open, revealing a perfect double walking a life that mirrored so perfectly it was terrifying. The hands lowered slowly, still trembling as the first thought emerged. Action, investigation, understanding. How could this be? What steps could be taken to reclaim, to verify, to confront, to survive the impossibility that now existed not in imagination, but in the undeniable clarity of a face, a ticket, a fortune, and a world turned upside down? Nothing made sense. And yet there it was, $40 million, a perfect face, a life replicated, the ordinary shattered, the impossible made reality. The coffee grew cold. The phone vibrated again. Notifications piled up. Social media exploded with stories, reactions, disbelief, envy, excitement. The perfect reflection smiled in every frame, every comment, every headline. And the realization crystallized. The world had shifted. The ordinary life had been interrupted by an impossible twin, an exact copy who had claimed a fortune that had no right to exist in this life. The reflection had stepped into reality. And now, nothing would ever be the same. Every step, every glance, every memory of ordinary existence felt tainted by the knowledge that a perfect copy had crossed the line, and nothing could explain why or how this had come to pass. Fear and fascination collided, gripping tightly, refusing to let go. The world outside continued unaware, unchanging, but inside the realization burned like wildfire. A perfect double existed. A fortune had been claimed. And the ordinary life had become impossible to trust, impossible to recognize, impossible to continue without confronting the reality of a world where someone, somewhere, was living exactly the same life with impossible success and impossible fortune. Questions multiplied, each more urgent than the last. How could this be reversed? How could the truth be proven? How could the impossible be undone? Every thought spiraled, intertwining with memories, reflections, photographs, mundane details of life that now seemed vital clues to understanding an impossible event. The heart raced. The pulse pounded. Reality stretched thin under the weight of the impossible. And the image on the screen, perfect, smiling, victorious, unbothered by disbelief, remained the center of a storm that could not be escaped. Every instinct screamed, every rational thought failed, every possibility exhausted. Only one truth remained, undeniable and terrifying. The face on the screen was identical. The fortune was real. The ordinary world had been fractured, and nothing would ever make sense again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Every morning brought a fresh wave of questions, each more urgent than the last. The world seemed normal outside, but inside, everything was unraveling. The face on the screen haunted every thought, every reflection, every shadow in the room. It wasn't just a lookalike anymore. It was a presence, an impossible presence that demanded attention, demanded answers. The lottery winner was everywhere. In headlines, in social media posts, in casual conversations overheard at coffee shops or on the bus. People pointed, speculated, and praised, while the reality of impossibility settled heavier with every passing moment. Investigations seemed natural, inevitable. Each detail from the lottery announcement was examined, re-examined, questioned, and verified. The numbers on the ticket, the validation process, the identity checks, all of it was meticulously documented by news outlets and officials. And yet, nothing explained the perfect resemblance. Every attempt to rationalize failed. Every logical explanation dissolved into impossibility. The mind raced through countless theories: a twin separated at birth, a genetic anomaly, a deepfake, a fraud, a hallucination. Each was considered, each rejected, leaving the same inescapable conclusion. The reflection on the screen was real. It existed. It had won. The fortune had been claimed. Panic began to intermingle with curiosity. The questions evolved. Who was this person? How had they lived a life so parallel to what had been experienced? How could someone exist so identical, yet independently, in a world already thought fully understood? There were small details noticed that deepened the unease. Subtle mannerisms, gestures, quirks, and habits that had always seemed personal were mirrored in this impossible stranger. A habit of tapping fingers when nervous, the way a head tilted slightly when thinking, the faint scar near the eyebrow. Every nuance was replicated flawlessly. It was no longer just resemblance. It was replication, an exact duplication of the life that had been lived in quiet, ordinary obscurity until now. Social media became both a source of obsession and terror. Every post, every video, every comment revealed more of the life being lived in parallel. Friends, colleagues, and casual acquaintances noticed the resemblance, posting side-by-side comparisons, reactions, and speculations. It was overwhelming. Each like, each comment, each share became a reminder that reality had shifted. Personal memories collided with the images online. Moments once thought private, gestures, smiles, even fleeting thoughts, now seemed reflected in a stranger. The mind struggled to comprehend. Attempts to contact the authorities, the lottery commission, and even investigative journalists yielded only facts about the winner. Verified ticket, legitimate process, authentic fortune. No one could explain the uncanny duplication. The inability to influence, confront, or change reality intensified the feeling of helplessness. A plan formed, however tentative, driven by necessity. Observation, documentation, tracking. Every public appearance of the lottery winner became a point of focus. Videos were recorded, photos captured, behaviors noted, timelines compared. Everything was analyzed, cataloged, and measured against the life already known. Patterns emerged, small but undeniable. The habits, gestures, and subtle cues aligned more perfectly than coincidence should allow. Anxiety deepened. Sleep became a battleground. Dreams merged with waking reality, blending memories of ordinary life with flashes of fortune, fame, and impossible resemblance. Each dream ended the same: staring at a mirror, seeing the other face smiling back, triumphant and untouchable. The physical world began to feel alien. Every reflection, every shadow, every stranger on the street seemed to carry traces of the duplicate existence. Paranoia intertwined with curiosity. Every movement in public spaces was scrutinized. Every passerby could be a reflection, every interaction a clue. Attempts to confide in friends or family only produced disbelief or concern. The world outside was blind to the impossibility. Conversations felt hollow, distant, unable to grasp the magnitude of the revelation. The isolation intensified the obsession. Every waking moment was dominated by the perfect duplicate and the fortune that should never have been claimed by anyone else. Questions that could not be answered consumed the mind. Was this a parallel life intersecting with reality? Was it a mistake in the fabric of existence? Or was there some darker, more deliberate design at play, a force beyond comprehension orchestrating this impossible duplication? Days turned into nights and nights into a haze of observation, reflection, and meticulous comparison. Every detail of life, every photograph, every casual gesture was catalogued alongside the movements and expressions of the lottery winner. A pattern of impossibility emerged, undeniable and unyielding. The realization was inescapable. The world had created a perfect double, an exact mirror, living a life that intersected with fortune, fame, and opportunity in ways impossible to reconcile with reason. The tension built steadily, an unrelenting pressure that pressed against every thought, every heartbeat, every breath. The ordinary had been replaced with a reality that defied logic, and the burden of understanding fell heavily, unbearably. And then came the first contact, subtle and unanticipated. A message, an email, a comment, small, seemingly innocuous, but unmistakably aware. Someone had noticed the connection, the impossibility, the uncanny resemblance. Fear and anticipation collided. The existence of the perfect double was no longer just a public phenomenon. It was personal. The unknown had reached out, bridging the gap between ordinary existence and the mirrored fortune. Every instinct screamed caution. Every rational thought demanded retreat. But curiosity, necessity, and a deep, unrelenting need for answers propelled forward. The next steps were deliberate, methodical, careful. Observation continued. Every movement of the lottery winner was tracked, analyzed, and interpreted. Every public appearance, every social media post, every reported interaction became part of a growing map of the duplicate life. Patterns, habits, and behaviors were scrutinized, compared, and cataloged. It became clear that this was no random coincidence. The duplication was precise, thorough, and intentional. Each new detail uncovered only deepened the sense of urgency. Understanding, intervention, confrontation, each possibility weighed and measured against the impossibility of the situation. And yet, clarity remained just out of reach. Every revelation raised more questions than answers. Every discovery intensified the desire to uncover the truth. The fortune, $40 million, loomed large. Its presence, a tangible marker of impossibility, created a tension that could not be ignored. It was a prize won by a life that should not exist, a reflection that should not move through the world with legitimacy and claim. The storm of obsession, fear, and curiosity reached a crescendo. Sleep became impossible. Every waking moment was dominated by the image, the fortune, the reality that had fractured so completely. A plan formed, fragile but necessary. Observation, documentation, and eventual confrontation. The impossible could not continue unchallenged. The world had to be faced, truths uncovered, explanations demanded. And as the final hours of the day approached, a single undeniable thought solidified. The duplicate existence would not remain unchecked. The fortune would not be ignored. The impossibility would be confronted. Every detail, every gesture, every habit had been catalogued, measured, and analyzed. Nothing would remain unexamined. The twin life, the perfect copy, the impossible winner would be understood. The tension, the obsession, the fear, the curiosity, all coalesced into a singular, unyielding focus. Answers were coming. The reality of the duplicate existence would not remain unchallenged. The fortune would be scrutinized. The impossible would be made comprehensible. And in the quiet moments, before action, before confrontation, before resolution, the weight of impossibility hung in the air, heavy, unrelenting, and utterly consuming. Every heartbeat echoed with anticipation. Every thought revolved around the perfect duplicate and the fortune that should never have existed. And as the night deepened, the world outside unaware, the decision crystallized. The confrontation would come. The impossible